Joining us today is Roland Freudenstein, co-founder of the Brussels Freedom Hub. During the press conference with the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, President Donald Trump said the war in Ukraine no longer risks becoming a third world war. Actually, I want to show his statement.
But that's a war that could have been a third world war, and I don't think we're going to be there now. But that was heading to a third world war, and what a shame it is. What a shame it is.
Well, how realistic is this assessment given the recent developments we know in Poland and in Europe?
Sofia, honestly, if you watch the whole press conference, which I did, you can see that Trump is mentioning this at a point where he admits that his efforts to make peace between Russia and Ukraine have basically failed. I mean, he doesn't use these words. He says that he's disappointed that Putin let him down and so on. But look, the situation is very clear. He has to present something as a success. So spontaneously, he comes up with this line that he prevented World War III, that World War III is not an option anymore. It used to be a possibility, but now, thanks to President Trump's efforts, it's not a possibility anymore. That is all there is to it. So honestly, I would not give too much credence and too much importance to these words by President Trump. He's trying to save his reputation and trying to present something as a success. So whatever he says, and I really think in general, we should not analyze every single word of Donald Trump. Sometimes he doesn't mean it. Sometimes he doesn't even know what he's saying. Like he confused Armenia and Albania and called Azerbaijan Abu Dijan or something. So look, let's stop hanging on every word of President Trump and discuss the really important issues. That's my ask.
Well, that's true, and that is a very interesting point, especially when we see this contrast in statements with Donald Trump and other European leaders. Meanwhile, Poland's President Karol Nawrocki is calling on NATO to be prepared for war. But do you think it's possible kind of to explain this contrast? Do you think Donald Trump actually take into account what's going on in eastern flank?
Who knows? I mean, he said all kinds of things about the Russian incursion into Poland. He said, here we go, whatever that means. Then he said it may have been a mistake. So honestly, we really do not know what's going through his head about the Russian drones in Poland. President Nawrocki is absolutely right that, first of all, Russia is attacking, the West is attacking NATO countries, for the moment in a hybrid manner, for the moment in so-called credible deniability, but this may turn into a hot war. But in order to prevent such a hot war, we need to be prepared to fight it. That's the whole essence of the principle of deterrence. You need to be ready to fight a war in order to prevent it. That is what President Nawrocki meant. That is what other NATO leaders mean when they talk about we have to prepare to wage a war against Russia.
Another war which is Russia leading right now is informational war. And we know that Russia has launched a new wave of propaganda against Finland. Russia's ex-president, now the deputy head of Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, as usual, accuses Helsinki of Russophobia and even calls it a former Nazi ally. I have a question. Why is Moscow targeting Finland now, and what is behind this rhetoric?
Well, we can only suspect that there's a couple of reasons for this. One, of course, is that obviously, as we saw in the incursion of drones into Poland, Russia is demonstrating to NATO that is not only targeting Ukraine, that Russia is actually going beyond that and threatening NATO countries. So one day it's Poland with drones, the other day it's Finland with propaganda. Second, Finland has the longest direct border with Russia. So it's a particularly welcome victim of Russian propaganda attacks. And here's my third point, and that's probably the most important one. Recently, Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, has been particularly effective in influencing President Trump's narrative about Putin, about Russia, about the dangers of letting down Ukraine. And I think that Putin realized that, and he minds. And so there is a particular grudge against Finland, and that's why they're attacking Finland now.
Russia's action across Europe, especially in the east and neighboring countries, are being described among different analysts and media as a hybrid warfare. First, do you agree? And how effective is this strategy for Moscow? And is Europe doing enough to resist it?
Okay, the first question is that, yes, the hybrid war is ongoing. It's actually intensifying. Some people also call it a shadow war. I think in Brussels, in the corridors of NATO and the European Union, shadow war is now the fashionable buzzword at the moment. But it's exactly the same as hybrid war. It means that Russia is creating tension and actually acting against NATO and the European Union and their member states with other things than frontal, open military attack. So anything from propaganda to internet trolling, social media, espionage, sabotage, and of course, direct, acts of murder of individuals or threats of murder against individual leaders. All this is hybrid warfare, is the shadow war. This is, by the way, happening in other NATO countries as well, not just the eastern flank. It's happening in Germany, it's happening in Spain, it's happening in basically all NATO member states. There have been cases of Russia's shadow war over the last 3 years. Now, is it working? Big question mark. It's definitely helping to increase the notion of danger, the notion of being threatened in Western societies. If you just look at the German debate, for example, there's been a cover story of Germany's most important political weekly, Spiegel, a couple of weeks ago. Are we heading to a new war? And the main factor in all this is precisely the shadow war that Russia has launched upon all of our countries. So, yes, there is a heightened feeling of alarm. Some people are more scared than they were before. Others are more determined. So it remains to be seen what the consequences will be of this hybrid warfare. Now, is the West doing enough? No. I think that it is very difficult to defend an open society against hybrid warfare. You can't lock down the internet. You cannot inhibit. You cannot disable the recruitment of so-called ad hoc agents and saboteurs in the darknet. This is all happening. It's very difficult to prevent that. Now, what the West should do instead is to counterattack. Don't always leave the initiative to Russia. We should create our own actions to get Putin into a problematic situation. And that, of course, ranges from sanctions, tougher sanctions, to economic banning of Russian oil and gas, to also covert action. I really think that NATO member states, maybe individually, not as a NATO policy or anything, but individually should enhance their covert actions against Russia so that for once Putin has to think twice how to react to this.
In order to defend and prevent further attacks, the EU is planning a drone wall along its eastern border. Could this become a real barrier against Russian attacks on drones, or do you think it's mainly a symbolic move and a signal to Kremlin?
No, it's more than symbolic. When it was introduced by Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, last week, I think, it's definitely composed of many, many elements. It goes from detection instruments like radar and sensors to fast-moving command and control structures to the actual weapon systems that would intercept Russian drones. Now, these, again, may be drones themselves. These may be guns. I mean, Ukraine is using air defense cannons to great effect against Russian drones, and we should learn from that. And of course, ultimately, it also involves actual missiles, which is the most expensive element in this whole chain. So a drone wall would be composed of many elements. It would require substantial financial means. Now, Ursula von der Leyen proposed to take this money from the SAFE program, SAFE program of the European Union for for member states to take out credits to finance defensive purchases. And it will take a long time to build up. So it's nothing that we can have next month or even in the beginning of 2026. That's for sure. But we have to start now.
In Ukraine, we already heard some news that Ukraine could become a potential part of this coalition. Do you think the EU and Ukraine could work as allies in terms of this drone wall?
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to defense against Russian drones, we have seen just last week at the Russian incursion in Poland how effective and actually cost-effective also Ukraine manages to shoot down 80–90% of incoming Russian drones, whereas NATO managed just a small fraction of that at fantastic costs, right? So we have much to learn from Ukraine. Now, does this mean that NATO will actually shoot down Russian drones in cooperation with Ukraine over Ukrainian territory? That's an open question. There have been proposals after the Russian incursion into Poland. President Zelensky has very clearly approved of such ideas and plans, but I don't think at the moment there is a political will in the Western countries, in NATO, or at least in most NATO member states, because this would mean getting into a direct confrontation, military confrontation with Russia over Ukrainian territory, i.e. outside of NATO's territory. That is something that many member states are not ready to at the moment. I think it will take great amounts of political leadership, and maybe it will take more aggression by Russia for this balance to shift. And then maybe we get to a situation where NATO will actually be ready to have some kind of integrated anti-drone defense together with Ukraine.
Well, that's an interesting point, but I would like also to talk about some notable changes within Russia. Deputy Chief of the Presidential Administration, Dmitry Kozak, who supported negotiations with Ukraine, has resigned. The Institute for the Study of War links his departure to disagreements with Putin because Kozak pushed for talks while the Kremlin appears determined to continue the war in Ukraine. Could Kozak's resignation be read as a sign that Putin is unwilling to engage in negotiations?
Well, the simple answer is yes. Kozak was, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the only one who contradicted Putin. And Actually, to me, it was surprising that he's kept part of his functions for such a long time. It was really a question of time until he had to leave his post, all of his posts, and I think this is no dramatic change. It's just a confirmation of the fact that Putin at this point thinks he can win, and he doesn't want to negotiate, let alone a ceasefire.
Before you said that we don't need to analyze every word of Trump, but I still want to make clear about his recent statement about a ceasefire. He has ruled out President Putin for a ceasefire at this stage of the war. Do you think it kind of change in the U.S. strategic objectives, or do you think it? We can explain it as a change in American rhetoric, because we know that before Donald Trump was one who was calling to sit down and talk and go for these peace negotiations.
Well, the change in Trump's rhetoric about the ceasefire happened after the Alaska meeting with Putin. And obviously, Putin managed at that time to convince Trump that it's useless, it's fruitless to pursue a ceasefire because Russia is not going for it anyway. So that's something that Trump accepted. And then suddenly, after the Alaska meeting with Putin, sold as his own line, his own policy. Now, does that signal a strategic shift in the US attitude? Well, that would presuppose that the US has a strategy. Well, it doesn't, Sofia. This administration has no strategy. Somehow Trump wants to appear like the peacemaker, so he gets the Peace Nobel Prize. But other than that, he always says, yeah, the killing has to stop. But he has no idea how to combine all the factors of, war to end and at the same time preserve Ukraine as a free and sovereign country. He doesn't know that. So again, honestly, I would not give too much credence to every single word of Donald Trump. In this case, Putin was effective in convincing Trump. In other points, Trump says he's disappointed by Putin. I'm a little bit at a loss in seeing all these rhetorical changes as a change in strategy, because there is no strategy.
Roland, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. We will keep following these developments in the US and the European Union.